For those interested in Hermetic training, please check out the link to the online group Seshen Circle, Blue Bell Hill below. Thank you so much. Now begins the podcast. Why did I capitalize the A on the title of the last interview video? I don't know why. Anyway, as I was just thinking that an obsessive quality is a virtue in such modes of being, is it not? I feel tested by the god of the desert. Bring it on. Hello and welcome to the Broderick Wallace channel. I think you're going to enjoy this. Let's do it. We are recording. Great. Wonderful. Okay.
Where are you parked up anyway? If that's not
oh no, it's not a secret. I've just found myself a little car park in Kent, UK.
You're in Kent.
Yeah, it's just outside a pub. It's quite quiet. Yeah, there's a nice little tree just next to me where the crows nest in the evening. It's quite atmospheric. In the countryside, you know, like a little countryside town, but it's becoming more, I don't know, as the years go by. The last 17 years I've been cleaning windows here, I notice it's getting more I don't know, more like London, if you know what I mean. Everywhere is becoming less countrified in a way. Oh. Right.
Just give me a sec.
Sure, yeah, take your time. So shall we go into where are you, by the way?
I'm in Oxford at the moment.
Yeah, oh, of course, yeah.
I'm always in Oxford.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I'm mostly in Oxford. You know it, in East Oxford?
I have been to Oxford a few times. My late father used to live there, yeah.
Right.
What, Banbury? Is that in Oxford, Banbury, or close? Banbury.
Banbury, well, Banbury's about 30 miles away, really. But yeah, I suppose people kind of count it as being it's on the same services and everything.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Maybe it's not 30 miles, 20 miles or something like that.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Yeah.
Oh,
well, an atmosphere of education then.
Yeah, if you like. Well, they say Detroit with colleges.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
This is the car makers here, you know.
Do you know what I think? All the best. Well, you know, there's always an exception to every rule, but a lot of the best guys you meet, they've got a mixture between real life experience and just passion, where they're just really into their subject. They don't need to come from a background of academia or anything. They just love it and they live it, and a little bit of that, I don't know what you might call it, working class grit seems to give them a kind of a work ethos. That's my theory anyway.
Yeah, there you go. I can relate to that.
Yeah. Right. Okay. We'll snap into interview mode then, if you're happy.
Yeah, let's go for it.
Wonderful. And so I have the questions in my magical diary, And I had to actually physically write those 32 questions as well. Just earlier on, so my right hand has suffered. So my handwriting just gradually got worse as I got towards the end. But I've made some notes.
You're very thorough.
Sorry, Mogg, go ahead.
I've got the questions in front of me as well. That's quite handy. Not the supplement, but you know, you can put that in.
Oh, great! Yeah, that's wonderful. And yeah, for the viewer, I will put the questions on the screen as I read them as well. That's something I think will make a nice feature, which was actually Mogg's idea earlier. Right, I've got written here some little reminders. On intro, mention reception. Okay, I'm going to mention the reception. Sometimes my voice cuts out a little bit here and there, but it seems to favour the guest, which is what we want. So bear that in mind. Sometimes, you know, I might lose a word here and there. Captions, I've just mentioned that. The other thing is, definitely check out the playlist. There's a playlist on my channel for interviews and conversations, so you might find some earlier stuff that you're interested in. Okay, without any further ado, let's go back to ancient Egypt. One of my favorite subjects, and I know it's one of Mogg's. So the traditional first question is, Mogg, when did you first discover that magic is a real thing?
Well, I guess there's a couple of different ways of taking that question. You mean whether there was a thing? There's two types of magic. Then there's the kind of magic that conjurers do, and there's the stuff you read about in kind of fantasy books, I suppose, and in films and stuff. And there's a kind of other type of magic, which is a kind of thing that I kind of think is like a religious thing, really, that people still do. Right? They still actually practice it, not as a conjuring, although sometimes there's a little bit of an overlap, but as a real thing, as a real kind of spiritual path, then, put it that way. I don't know, quite a long time ago, I suppose. But I usually say probably when a friend, he must have known I was into this kind of stuff. I come from quite an industrial inner city place as well. I used to kind of wander around the wasteland around this great big river and, you know, getting into kind of just alone, really, kind of exploring. Yeah, there's something about the wasteland. So I think that was when I started feeling kind of magical, and I've always felt quite not psychic, but kind of dreamy and sort of spacey in lots of ways, I suppose. But maybe when a friend kind of said he had a biography of Aleister Crowley, and he said you'd probably enjoy this. He said he couldn't really get into it. He said, but he had this feeling that I might like it. So he gave me this biography. So probably that was the moment, and I still think that's kind of one of the best, just on the level of a kind of cracking yarn type thing. This story is slightly larger than life. So that would have been it, really, when I was a kind of mid-teens, I suppose. I was always doing weird things with, you know, trying to hypnotize people and trying to look for ghosts and stuff before then. But that really kind of said, oh, well, there's actually this whole world, really, this whole technique that you could get into based around the ideas of Aleister Crowley. So yeah, that was the moment, I think, threshold.
Oh, absolutely, that's fascinating. Yeah, and that moment where it's like this, I thought this was just comic books, movies, whatever, and no, this is a real art that people really practice. That moment it's quite shocking, isn't it? And yeah, I like Aleister Crowley. Yeah, it seems to be that
quite
way.
Exciting. That's funny, when I first looked at his book, Magic in Theory and Practice, which is quite young. I mean, I'm probably about 15 or something like that, and it has this very spooky cover. Well, to me, I still think it is that with this drawing done by Kenneth Grant, and there's something quite evocative about that, the colours and everything. I think that's probably deliberately designed that way to kind of evoke certain ideas in whoever looks at it. That was a moment. So like a lot of people, I kind of start working my way through this great big book, really. I think there was a moment, it starts out quite easy. It's a quite, inspirational book. But then it tells you to sit down and kind of meditate, really, but in a special magical way. And there comes a point where, I don't know, it's kind of overwhelming. It's unexpected. It took me ages to learn to sit down and do these things, but there came a moment when I was able to sit quite quietly, which doesn't sound like any big deal, let's face it. But in modern society, I think it probably is quite unusual to just sit and go into this mental space in this set of techniques that he lays out. And there came a moment when I kind of thought, I think it's familiar that, that it was overwhelming. It was a bit too much. It was almost like you feel as if you really are going to move through another dimension or something, or maybe you're never going to come back. It's this sort of fear of ego loss. Maybe you feel as if your whole ego mentality is being kind of taken apart, and you don't really know. And it's quite physical. It's a psychophysical thing as well. There's part of you thinks, well, God, I wasn't really expecting that. All these physical sensations and these mental sensations. I wonder whether I'll be able to put it back together again, really. So that was a specific meditation, really, which is, I think it always promises you that when you read these books on that particular type of yoga that Crowley was into, the Raja Yoga, that you don't really have to believe very much. You just have to do these things. Maybe you get beginner's luck, you see, if you've not done it before as well, because it's not the sort of stuff you would have thought about. It says just do X, Y, Z, and something weird, it doesn't put it this way, but essentially it says something weird is going to happen to you. And it will be completely unexpected, and it will open a door, basically. So that's what I got from that book. It kind of really, I suppose the idea is you're supposed to keep trying to recreate that moment. But you can never quite, well, you do, but obviously that's the first time you go through that door in your head. That's quite something, I think. Some people can't bear it. Over the years, I've met other people who, it's too freaky, really. They've said, just trying to sit. I said, well, let's just sit, and they say it just makes them feel really bad. They just feel sick and funny. They said, well, look, you're only going to sit and just think about hardly anything, really. What's the big deal? They said, no, I can't do it. I can't take it. I feel funny. I don't like it. And they stop. They have to stop.
There is a massive aversion to just simply sitting still, and that's where the real mystery kicks off. In my experience,
where the mystery kicks off. Absolutely.
Yeah. Because I've found that people that take up meditation, and for me, it took me years to put these things together, because I've mentioned before on the channel, David Conway, fellow Welshman like yourself, it was his book, An Occult Primer, that got me introduced me to the idea that magic is a real thing. And then reading Crowley, I couldn't understand a lot of it, but I could understand book 4. So I was starting to piece things together then, and that's one of the books actually holding my phone up right now. And it wasn't till Franz Bardon where everything just, oh my God, I get it now, for me, So I do, but anyway, the point I was getting to was, I find that people that go on to really live this art form, they will have experiences in meditation. Basically, things will come along to say hello, and they'll kind of enjoy that. I mean, that's, I definitely find that. Whereas people who are not destined, if you like, I know it sounds terribly elitist, but I don't think things come along to say hello to people who are not going to step upon the path, if you like, paint that picture.
It's a bit threatening, I suppose. It's not what you're kind of led to expect, really.
Oh, yeah.
If you're not, and that suddenly comes upon you, you don't realize there's this whole range of experiences, physical and psychological, that are kind of available to you, really. It's quite shocking, I think, for some people to find that.
Yeah, definitely. You know, I don't think I've actually gotten over it. I don't think I ever will. I will never actually get over this fact. I think all those years in, you know, Christian school assemblies and, you know, materialisms, you know, scientific education, there was enough of that to make this a permanent shock. It's always new to me, you know, like, so oh no, that's wonderful. Yeah, really great to hear your early experiences there. I identify with the idea of the wasteland as well, definitely. And I'll move on to question 2. And my questions, you know, anyone who's seen the interview with Ron will know that they're quite long in places, so I apologize in advance. But deep breath. I have coined the term Celto-Egyptian on my channel to describe my own spiritual practice. As a Welshman practicing a reformulation of ancient Egyptian religion, does this resonate with you? Was there a connection, as some have hinted at over the years, between the UK and ancient Egypt? The legend of Queen Scotia and the sun cult of King Arthur, for example, or perhaps the connection is an expression of some romantic desire or half-buried Victorian fantasy.
Wow.
Over to you.
Yeah, I think maybe the thing, obviously the Scotia thing, I guess that must be Scotland. And as I was saying, there's a link with Ireland and with the Celtic world that way through the Coptic Christian missionaries. They're kind of, it sounds a bit wacko when people say that, but apparently the crozier of the early Celtic Church in Ireland is exactly the same as the Coptic sacred emblem. So there are all sorts of sort of hidden links between everywhere, the modern world really, and Egypt, which that's one of the things I've kind of been unraveling, is how there's this, how we are still influenced by them in lots of ways, and you know, that are kind of, because it's one of these cancelled cultures where the things that we do that we don't know why we do. So I've been exploring that quite a lot. So it wouldn't be surprising, I think. As you say, with the Welsh thing, one of the things that you'll find that will link the two together, from my point of view, is the constellation, is the northern constellation Ursa Major. All these cultures seem to have this connection with this particular constellation. You get it in the runic tradition. I guess you're going to find it in the Welsh tradition as well. So that would be a clear parallel. And yeah, I kind of there's a strange thing, because so in terms of megalithic cultures as well, which is not Celtic, but there's maybe so you get something like Stonehenge and the stone circles. Quite early on, when I was in Wales, I was exploring all these stone circles, some of which were kind of ancient ones, and some of which are for the Eisteddfod and stuff. As you know, they build these things all over the place, but they use the same kind of things. But certainly, for ages, I kind of thought that something like Stonehenge was another megalithic culture, because Egyptian culture is this what you call a megalithic late Stone Age culture, a Bronze Age culture as well, but and builds these megalithic structures that are to do with astronomy. So you'd think, oh, well, obviously Stonehenge, which is got this other big strong link with Wales, of course, as half of the stones of it come from Wales originally. You would find, if you're open to that idea of things like the northern orientation of monuments, which is an important element, obviously, of the Egyptian culture, and it's also an important element of Stonehenge, and obviously the other observations that it makes, like the lunar calendar. I think recently, I don't think that's too speculative a thing really, but whether there's a connection. But why is it that the old religion of the stars does seem to have all these points all over the world that connect it together? There's recently been a piece of academic research, funny enough, on the fact that you have this one of the arrangements of stones, you have 30 stones at Stonehenge and you have 5 in the center, right? So if you have 30 stones, well, of course, the Egyptian lunar calendar has 30 days as well, and it's the basis of everything that comes afterwards. So they say, well, maybe that's like a kind of connection. But not only do you have the 30 days, you have 5 great trilithons in the center of the circle, and you have this thing in Egypt of the 5 liminal days at the end of the annual cycle, the 5 extra days on the year, so 300. So if you got 30 times 12 or what, you get, you have 360, and then you've got 5 extra days. So that there are definitely these underlying links between the two cultures on a very, very deep level, usually via astronomy and the observation of the stars. Whether people actually were directly in contact is another matter. Probably were. Wales always had this reputation in the ancient world as being a kind of center for a mystery cult, which they called the Druids or whatever in the classical writers. Maybe there's something in that, given that you do find, I say, we've got the stone circles, you've got these long barrows and passage graves and everything all over Wales, and quite a lot of them concentrated in Britain. It's very famous for it. And they have these alignments. They have a lot of the same features that you would find in the megaliths you'll find in Egyptian tombs. You have the alignments, and you have kind of a door, a spirit door. This thing about spirit doors, a number of monuments that have these spirit doors for communication with the dead. So yeah, no, I think that it's not just fantasy. I think there is a real connection there. I think knowing something about Egypt enabled me to speculate about some of the things that I'd always kind of imagined in Wales originally. But I think it's true, really. I think it's definitely there if you know where to look. And through the books and all the rest, I've also shown how an awful lot of stuff to do with astronomy and the calendar ultimately does come from Egypt. That's the calendar that we've, because the Welsh people, they used a lunar calendar as well. That's another quite important link between the two cultures, really. So yeah, go for it. I tend to call my thing Tanchem, which is a mixture of, so going the other way as well. You have in the tantric and the Indian and the Indo-European and the Egyptian, if you like. And of course, then you got Wales again, because we're sort of the other end of that Indo-European spectrum, really, in terms of our myths. So there's loads still to discover, I think, but I think people are probably a bit more open-minded about it than they were once as the academics are studying it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you just reminded me there of the kind of blue painted or blue skinned deities, from India, and
Blue man. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, the woe, the Celts, the blue warriors, and so there's all these links all over the world. And talking of Egypt, I mean, I forgot to include it actually, but there is a report of a buried baboon somewhere. I can't remember where, but it's quite ancient, which
in Wales, or
I can't remember. I just can't. You've got to be careful with these things that you see on the internet, But it did seem legit. This burial of a Neolithic burial. I think it was Neolithic burial of a baboon skeleton, which obviously had to come from Africa or such like. And you talked about the false door. This on Bluebell Hill, a place that's very special to me. There's a dolmen called Kit's Coty, and it is basically what drew my attention. I was there. It was 2012. Some guy, me and my friend jokingly, we call this guy Mark of the Mist because he just emerged from the mist and announced himself as Mark and said, "You know that's a false door, don't you?" And we just sort of stood there looking at it, and it conjured up the idea of the Egyptian false door. So when you said that, that all kind of lit up for me, the idea of, because there's like your typical trilithon, but there's another, stone in the middle, which is
well, you probably know that in some of the books, most of the books I usually start out with an image of the false door from Egypt, and most people when they should see it, because I've kind of standardized it using the same geometry really, and when people look at that, which they use as a kind of passage, people think of the trilithon, as well. For the Egyptians, it's a doorway. But maybe that's the trilithons are kind of doorways as well. This spirit, there is a special type of door. It's a spirit door.
Yeah,
it appears. I've used that a lot in all of the books. Really, that kind of image, and people say, "Oh, well, what's that got to do with Egypt?" And I said, "Well, it is actually an Egyptian image. It's kind of weird."
I can remember it behind you now in some of your videos, and I will say for the viewer, I haven't read any of Mogg's books.
You've done the films, yeah.
I mean, I discovered you.
I've got the book here, but maybe if I get a chance, I'll reach over and take a risk and show you the picture. I tell you what, I'll do it anyway.
Yeah, please do.
Scary things.
Yeah, I was just saying, I haven't actually read any of Mogg's books. I just happened to come across Mogg on the internet, and I mean, the fact that I've drafted him in to be my second guest should, say a lot.
Yeah, there you go. If you look, I don't know if that's coming out back to front. That's the frontispiece of my door, right, of my book. I mean, I've used it in a lot of books, but this image, which maybe looks quite megalithic, really, which it is, but it's also based on the Egyptian false door, and suggests using it as it's like a portal, which is what the Egyptians used it for, as a portal to the underworld to talk to their dead ancestors. And that's a very Celtic, Welsh kind of view. Oh, it's got the red stamp. It's got the red stamp. In the book, you don't get the red stamp unless you want it, but because that's a stamp of with the god Set on it, really, which is another one of my special things.
Oh, definitely. We'll get on. We'll get on to Set very, very soon. But I just wanted to say, this idea of the false door, I've found that, I mean, this is going to get very mystical for a second, but, if you're watching this, you can probably handle it. I've found that in the deeper states of meditation, it will use any, whatever you want to describe, the numinous or whatever, it will use symbols that you're familiar with, not only the ones that you're familiar with, but ones that are buried in your deep ancestral consciousness. So I've seen not only doors in a conventional sense, like the door in a house, but I've seen literally the screen of a mobile phone used to communicate information to me in visions. So I think, the idea of the doorway or the communication device is just across the board, so that really resonates with me. And it's just, oh mate, this is just too interesting. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get through this in one piece.
I agree. It's kind of fascinating stuff.
It is. It's just, like I say, my favorite subjects are squished
it's
together.
Funny, you say about the mobile phone, because we have them now, and they're really wonderful things for having. You can have this piece of wallpaper, which you can really use that. Because as I say, you pick up your phone so much now. I do anyway, and you can have kind of a sigil there or a doorway, or you can change it, and so in a sense, you're kind of always doing a little bit of magic. It's always reminding you of something that you really think you want reminding of. So yeah, definitely use the new technology for that.
Absolutely. And just by sheer coincidence, I do happen to have the stone doorway of Kit's Coty as my
On the front of your phone. Well, there you go.
actually
But
do.
doorways are very special things. Let's agree with that.
Yeah.
One way.
If I remember, I'll just whack up a picture of that here. And right, so I think this leads us on to question 3 just nicely. Are you able to connect with a spirit of place here in the UK with your Egyptianized thinking, spiritually speaking?
Yeah, I guess so. Quite a few, really. I already mentioned Stonehenge, which sounds a bit kind of cliche, I know, but I think for Stonehenge you have to do it in a special way. Don't do it the tourist route. Do it on one of the special days, which I was lucky enough to do, and and spend some quality time there the night there, and not just the stone circle, but the entire ritual site, and get to know it. So the spirit of that place always means a lot to me. I've had about half a dozen really good sort of moments there, really, including when, I say, we call it the liberation in whenever it was 1999, when it became back in public ownership. Really, it sort of was restricted to people, and people were able to kind of just gather there without paying a lot of money and without being supervised, and just get to know the site again. So that place definitely. Lots of other ones, really. Okay, say I live in Oxford, and Oxford's kind of quite special. But it's obviously the people have named it, because you have the river Thames that flows through Oxford. It's got its own name here, which is the River Isis, and whether that's kind of coincidence, it always kind of meant something to me. I kind of thought, oh well, look, that's the River Isis, and and there's a bit of Oxford called Port Meadow, which is what it is, right? It's a vast meadow that's never been ploughed, because it's part of the floodplain of the river. So it hasn't been ploughed forever. It's never been ploughed since the Neolithic, or since it was cleared. It's always, and essentially it is a kind of very, very ancient graveyard. But obviously they're not all tombstones. It's all kind of below the level of the of the meadow, and it's got a kind of association with horses as well, which is, it's a common land, so people are allowed to graze horses there, and they've been doing that for thousands of years apparently. But when I wanted to get a bit more formal, I went for a stage of wanting to sort of do more formal magic with a group, as one does. You go as a phase one goes through, and that would happen to be the OTO, and you have to do a kind of a practice where you get closer to a particular god or goddess, or you get religious. You try and develop your religious sensibility. It sounds weird, but that was a Crowley idea. You kind of thought that people had got a little bit too formal, and they needed to reactivate this emotional side of themselves. And he had a practice that people did, and you choose a goddess or a god or a whole religion, if you like, and you go out into the wilderness, and you, over a period of time, you kind of try and make a connection. So try not to be too intellectual. You're trying to be emotional, and you go into a place, an actual place. It's very important to go somewhere that's a little bit isolated and special. And this was the place I went to back then. It was, as I say, it's quite at night, especially. It's quite easy to kind of get lost in there. It's not full of people or anything. It's a popular place in the day. And then it's got the River Isis that flows through it. So you can do as I did, you can do a kind of a sacred ritual bath or whatever, purification, whatever you want to call it, in the river. And then you can do the meditation, and because it's quite a spooky, spirited place, so that place is very, very special to me. I've done lots of kind of things there, or just to enjoy it. Still landscapes like that. Libraries, funny enough, libraries always, I think, have a spirit to them, especially old libraries. You know, my original, maybe it's just me, I don't know. My kind of first ideas about kind of mysticism is very connected with these old spooky libraries, you know, that kind of labyrinthine and haunted. So yeah, places like that, sacred sites up and down the country, but those are probably the more important ones. I suppose if you're into Egypt, you know, there's quite a lot of Egyptian artifacts in museums that you can relate to. There's the final one I would mention is this place I've been thinking about, which is in London. There's the John Soane's Museum, which is an old Freemason's house, really, an architect, a real architect. He's in the basement. It's got the whole place is quite spooky, really. But in the basement, he's got this Egyptian sarcophagus that he managed to buy from Belzoni, I think. But the British Museum didn't want it, so he said, "Oh, I'll have it. I'll stick it in the basement." And it's a kind of one of the masterpieces of the world, really. But the John Soane's Museum is also on a kind of on a square in London that's apparently exactly the same footprint as the Great Pyramid.
Oh, really?
So I don't know, maybe that's deliberate. I don't know. You've got this sarcophagus, this Egyptian sarcophagus at one end, and then you've got this square like a. So yeah, that's my main spiritual place. Obviously, Egypt itself as well. I've kind of found quite a lot of spirituality there. So obvious place to go.
Growing up in Maidstone, in Maidstone Museum, there's a mummy there. So that was always like a big piece of my childhood. You know, like in the whole museum, that was the place to be frightened and fascinated. Just sort of, you know, peering in, you know, over the glass. And they've made a special sort of dedicated room now for this Egyptian mummy. And I can't remember the name. It'll come to me after, you know, the recording, of course. But they've actually made a special little room, and it's just painted completely black. And I walked in there, I thought, oh my God, they've actually probably done the most respectful thing they could have done. Just this completely black room with this mummy in there. You walk in there, the whole museum sort of disappears.
Yeah, well, that sounds better. Really. That sounds quite respectful, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I typical stuff. I did a meditation in that room actually, and it wasn't long before someone come along and was quite concerned. This is one of the things that really it just I shouldn't be amazed really. I had the same experience in a cathedral. I decided to go into meditation, just sitting in the dedicated, you know, Mary section of the cathedral, and someone come along and sort of tapped me on the arm 20 minutes later. Are you okay? It's like, and this is a religious building, you know, you know, what is this place for? You know, anyway, a couple of things come to mind. The River Thames and the River Isis, I need to look that up and be more familiar with what's going on there.
Check it out. I mean, probably it's just a wordplay, I think, but sometimes that's like surrealism, you know, it's not, maybe it's nothing to do with ISIS, but it just seems right, really. And you've got the river, so I think there's always this idea in magic that you're supposed to do pilgrimages to sacred places into the wilderness or whatever, and it's not always possible to do it. You might, you know, it'd be nice to go to the Ganges or the Nile, but if it's not possible, you kind of dedicate your local landscape in the same way and say, that's my River Nile, really.
Definitely.
Or that's my Ganges.
I would love to bring in here. I don't know if it's a.
I think it's quite an important magical idea. You create your own magical landscape in the end, and it comes alive. You know, that's a cool idea.
Definitely, and the spirit of place. You kind of have to work halfway with it. I mean, I've found that my interactions with the landscape, the Aylesford Downs, Bluebell Hill area, once you start reaching out to it, it will start to reach back to you.
Yeah.
You know, quite literally in your dreams.
Well,
it will say
magic, I think. And
And
one of the ideas, because see, in magic, one of the techniques is you kind of you enter this magical realm, this psychological, imaginal realm, the imaginarium, whatever you want to call it, the astral plane, and you construct your own world there, your own buildings sometimes, temples and buildings. And I kind of quickly worked out that rather, because there's a kind of quite idealized, when you read it in the books, they're quite sort of symbolic, idealized buildings, Solomonic temples or whatever. But it's a good idea to base it on an actual building, somewhere that, even if it's in a ruinous state now, that you can still look at the plans and you can still get the vibe. So you can revisit a place in your head that you've actually been to. So you've got a little bit of the kind of experience. That is powerful, I think. So you do the both. Is you use your imagination, but you give it help by, you see this, but you get an idea of how things might move around in that sort of space. So that's what. So spiritual place has always been a very important thing to me, really.
Do you know, I want to bring
old, but there's certain people as well who kind of really turned me on to that idea.
I want to bring the attention of the viewer to something you said there, because I remember this in one of your videos, and that is the idea of going back in a visionary experience to a place that that is spiritually resonant. Like, that's just a little throwaway thing you said. You just happened to mention it now, but I just want to place an emphasis on that. As I want to say, hey, I've experienced this, and it can be really powerful. Yeah, absolutely. And one of the going back to the river thing, the river in this area is called the River Medway, and they don't know why it's called the Medway, but I think it has a sort of reference to liminality, or at least it would be nice if it did, but that's always interested me. Why is it called the River Medway? Yeah.
I think all rivers are special places. As I say, originally I was brought up in Newport, and right next to the River Usk estuary is just industrial river running through the kind of docklands, really. But those places are still quite spirited, I think. They can still be magical. It doesn't have to be old Tweed countrified river. Obviously, that's nice too. But sometimes a big industrial river or through a city, I guess that's the idea of all the psychogeography and all the rest, is that even in the inner city, there are kind of remnants of a kind of the old world buried there and encoded into the city. And they say sometimes the city, the old medieval city or even older thing, it's kind of always trying to burst out again, even if there's only a couple of stones left of it, because they've got rid of it or whatever. It's got a spirit, really. All cities, I think, it's not just wilderness and country areas. All cities themselves are a kind of special type of wilderness, I think. That has a magic that can be explored. I know lots of people have developed that idea a lot more in a surprising way, and I completely relate to that.
Oh, wonderful stuff. That sounds really interesting, and I think that sets us up for the next question as well, actually. Yeah. Excuse me. Is there a druid-shaped hole in your ancestral heart that is filled somehow by your Egyptian paganism? Do you perhaps subconsciously lament over how much has been lost concerning old Albion?
Well, there you go. Well, it's yeah, I don't see why not. Yeah, I used to call myself Morgan Druid App Druid.
I've got to say, you've got the most Celtic name I've ever heard. I'm actually almost jealous.
And I spent a lot of time. I say I come from Newport, but there's a district of Newport that I also know really well, which is called Killian. which means the Castle of the Legion. Really, it's a kind of Roman, a Roman place. It's a kind of interaction between. It's a place of interaction between the Romans. Or a second Augustan Legion was stationed there, so you've got all their archaeology. But all around them on the hills, were the Silurian tribe, really, the local Celtic tribe, and they had quite a lot of relations with each other. So that, and you know, I should say that the Welsh writer Arthur Machen, right, who's written a lot about that area, and he was actually, I think he either lived there or maybe he was born there in Killeen. It's certainly a kind of blue platform and everything. So yeah, I do relate to the Druids. I think it's something. There's this guy, you know, as you know, YOLO. He's got my name as well, Morganu. He kind of, I think he created the idea of druidry. Really, he's a kind of chaos magician, I think. But I guess his model of what the Druids were like, which everybody kind of followed up, is kind of modeled on his idea of what the Egyptian priesthood would have been like. So there's a strange, some of it's fantasy. I think he did that. I'm sure you go visit his monument, because what survives of Druidry in Wales is, some ways, he kind of thought it was a little bit boring. It was a little bit too elitist in a way. There wasn't as much magic in the Druid tradition in the Welsh records as he kind of hoped there would be. There is stuff there. So he kind of thought, well, in typical chaos magic fashion, if it's not, I'll put the magic in then. I channel it. I suppose you'd say he channeled all this kind of magic from the ancient Druids into the modern world. I think we should. I kind of like that, actually. I respect him for that. But yeah, basically, if you've got this connection between the Silurian tribe in the kind of that Killeen Newport area, and the Romans, who of course spread an awful lot of the cult of goddess Isis. Really, I think they found records of Isis all over the world, sort of spread there by primarily by the Romans and everything. So that's definitely there in Killeen as well. You'll find it everywhere. So I Druid shaped hole. We kind of back in the day. I've never been formally into the Druid thing. I think you should just be, Druid just means magician, doesn't it? Really, I think I discovered recently. Anyway, I think that's primarily what the Druid, when they said Druids, they meant
that word,
magician, and that I can that completely.
There's so much. I mean, that word, it's so hard to pin down. So you hear oak knowledge. But just the other day, I heard someone say, Crowley's name, per durabo, the dura bit, which means endure, is like the enduring oak, and that is why they're called Druids. It's the same root. So it's like, oh God, there's another one, but it does seem to keep coming back to this idea of an oak, an enduring oak. When I think of enduring, I know this is a bit of a stretch. I think it might be a reference to the fact that it was an oral tradition, the fact that this would, the idea was that, unless you get wiped out like they did, that it would endure. But the idea of the oak tree, I can't help but think of, the world tree of the Norse culture and how that relates to the Kabbalah, this idea that a Druid was someone who would journey, the tree of creation, in meditation or whatever, So I've definitely got that Druid-shaped hole in my heart. So I'm projecting when I ask you that question. I'm definitely projecting, and it's just so difficult to. I do find it sometimes. I actually sit and think for long periods of time. What was it like? What were they like? What did they look like? I would give so much to be able to just go back 2,000 years and just walk around and ask questions, it would be awesome. Right, better move on to the next question. We've got so many. What do you think the Druids were up to, magically speaking? Do you think they practiced an elemental system similar to that found within Hermetics?
Yeah, I guess they certainly practiced. I mean, there's a strange thing. As I was looking at the question, I thought, because some of the best records of the Druids are from the Irish sagas and all the rest. And as I say, when they're describing the Druids in the Irish tradition, they mean magician. And there's a certain amount of discussion about the type of magic that they got. And there's obviously there are the debunkers, and they come up with this example of a ritual that an Irish Druid did. And they say, oh, well, that shows, and they say, oh, well, this ritual that the Irish Druid did, it's from the Bible, right? It's from the Old Testament, and therefore, so all these accounts, they're obviously just picking and choosing stuff from the Old Testament and projecting this onto the Druids, as saying this is the type of magic they did. But then, if you take that argument a step further, you can't, because I've done this research now, the ritual that occurs in the Old Testament, where did they get it from? And it turns out that the ritual that they practice, which I can describe to you, it's quite simple. It's actually an Egyptian ritual. So the type of rituals that the Irish Druids were said to be doing, in which they primarily, if I give a very simple magical technique, which it was used by the Egyptians, if you want to absorb the energy of something, if you want to learn something, if you wanted to learn a sacred text, then you do it through a form of eating magic. Really, you have to eat or drink something. So you may pass some beer or do over a kind of sacred object, catch that stuff, and then you drink it, and that will, depending on the words that are written on the object, that will somehow sort of imprint itself onto the liquid and will pass directly into your body. That's a very, very old technique, and very good technique, in fact. In the Irish records, they're using that to kind of as a way of revealing something, for them to reveal. They're given a certain collection of herbs, a certain thing to drink, bitter herbs. Women are given these things as bitter herbs in order to kind of reveal whether they've been faithful or not. I mean, I don't think this ritual, apparently this ritual never even used it within Judaism. They sell stuff that basically, but whatever. So, but what I learned from that is that the Irish Druids, and I would guess the Welsh Druids, any technique that they practiced, you'd be able to find a precedent for it within the Egyptian tradition. And it's when you talk about Hermeticism, essentially Hermeticism is Egyptian magic. It's got two different elements to it. It's got a kind of theoretical, philosophical element, which comes to us in these philosophical texts, which we know more about that at first because Christians and other people, other religions, they didn't find that so objectionable because it's quite philosophical, about meaning and stuff like that. But there's a sort of more practical element to it, practical magic. That's also part of Hermeticism. And both things, I think, you'll find when Egypt was basically being cancelled, right, at 2,000 years ago, when the culture was being suppressed, and the language was being forgotten and whatever, that people kind of almost gathered together the best bits, and that became a sort of a new religion, but was based on the Egyptian magical thing. So yeah, all the accounts I've seen of Druidry in literature in Ireland and I think in Wales, it's essentially they are practicing Egyptian magic, and sometimes there's some kind of remarkable samples that you can think that they could only have known of from direct contact. You know, it's so obscure. The kind of things that they do with mice and everything. You know, the kind of when people are dying in Egypt and children were dying, there were special foods were prepared for them, and one of the things that was prepared was this diet of mice. Basically, people eat mice in. It's a food item. It's quite a delicate food item, and you'll find that in European folklore. I think you'll find it even in Welsh folklore. This thing about mice, right? The kind of mythology connected with them and the magic connected with them. It's quite a weird connection. So yeah, I think definitely that's what the Druids would have been doing. They would have been because as they say, 9/10. They say 9/10 of magic. I don't know if you mentioned that. If it comes up later, comes from Egypt anyway. So it wouldn't really be surprising that they were, given that the Druids had this reputation for being very knowledgeable about the classical world and ancient philosophy. They read the Bible. They read the kind of Greek philosophical texts. They read Egyptian texts, really. I think that all of their techniques are recognizable as being from Egypt or being part of the magical tradition. Maybe you say not just from Egypt, but a sort of international tradition of magic. That they're using the same material. So yeah, I completely relate to them like that.
You know, obviously myself living on the road, you know, living in my van, I do a lot of meditation outdoors in the fields, in the woods, and this is let me see, it's getting on for let me think. I think this is the third winter now, and whenever it gets to this time of year, I mean, I don't know. I guess I can relate to the idea of meditation in that Eastern sense, all the while the sun is shining. But then, as soon as you know it's snowing and it's raining all the time and it's damp and it's wet, I need to light a fire and meditating in front of that fire. I've just had these feelings like I'm connecting with something ancestral. Like this is how it had to be done, and the fire was an integral part of practice, which when you think about it is very elemental. So I almost feel like the elements are literally beating down on the you know, whatever system of spiritual development they're going through. It would have been visceral and unavoidable, this, you know, this cold, this damp, and the need to sit in front of a fire. I can't quite formulate it fully, perhaps, you know, another a year or whatever, but I'm just getting, you know, through direct experience, you know, this really strong connection with fire in that way. Where were we? I think we're on question.
So we've done the Druids.
I think we've done the Druids.
Yeah,
so and we're an hour in. We've just covered the Druids.
This is Morgan Druid Ab Druids telling you.
We'll obviously for the viewer it will just carry on, but for, you know, for ourselves we'll do one more question and then take a, you know, a quick break to, you know, so we can come back. So this gets us on to Set at last and all that good stuff. So right, you belong to a group called the Companions of Set. Did you form this group? What is it in a nutshell?
Well, it's kind of slightly mythic thing, the Companions of Set. I suppose I could say I didn't really. It's an old designation, but I'm not the only one who's kind of hit upon this. But there's this idea. There's this Egyptian god Set, and he has a bunch of companions, if you like, who hang out with him, and there are various ways of kind of looking at that, right? Whether there's one popular way is to do with constellations. It's to do with it's an astronomical thing. It's to do with the kind of series of stars that are led by one particular star connected with the god Set. So it could be that, but there's also the kind of these things happen on a couple of different levels. There's this idea that that the god Set chooses in each generation, if you like, a certain number of companions that people who are going to, because this is kind of weird thing about the 20th century, really, that this god Set kind of re-emerges into popular culture and into magic, really, and facilitated by these people who are not, it doesn't necessarily mean they self-identify, I think, as being companions of Set. They're kind of chosen. So is that, I do run a kind of, I'm a little bit skeptical or jaundiced, I suppose you'd say, about the idea of magical orders and being too organized about things, but other people leave that to other people. I'm kind of more into a sort of ideology in a way, or maybe like you have the idea of the Rosicrucians, who I don't know if they ever really existed, but some people just kind of related to it and wrote things for them on their behalf. So it could be like that. I kind of do use it as a. See, other people have formed groups connected with the god Set from the 1960s onwards, but I don't completely relate to the way that that's been set up in the past. So it's partly from that. So I set up a kind of ecumenical group on Facebook called the Companions of Set, in which anybody with all the different views, more or less, of what the myth might mean could relate. So I kind of think it's that. It's more of an ideology, or it's more of an organization of the future. I think it's something that is manifesting, has been manifesting since the 1970s. The companions have been, and maybe it won't be for me. I'll kind of giving it a little bit of a push, but it's definitely something that is going to manifest in the future. So I think the companions of Set is a future order, or a future. I don't like the term order, magical order, which we all used to go for. It's more like a society, or a collective, or a affinity, an affinity group between people. It's an affinity that people naturally have for this particular god's Set, and I think it's been manifesting for since the 1960s, so the last 50 or 60 years, and it's growing. I think it's something that is going to manifest in the future. So that's the companions of Set for you. And I like to count myself as one of the companions.
Yeah, no, I really respect that idea that you're scribbling away and getting these ideas together and formulating them into some kind of cohesion.
Out of it if they want to, but I think it's more.
Yeah, you're doing something for future generations. That's admirable, and that it takes a lot of belief. It takes a lot of guts to pursue that. I know a few people involved in such activities, and this kind of thing is beginning for myself now, and it's quite a radical leap, and you're kind of not entirely on your own, but in some ways you can feel quite vulnerable taking that upon your shoulders. So much respect for that, absolutely. Okay, well we'll take a break here, and
what do you do now?
I'll just turn the camera on in a couple of seconds to register. Starting recording, and it says it's recording, so wonderful. So question number 7 is, who is Set? Some may immediately conjure up a link with Satan or Saturn. I understand that you equate him with Mercury. Can you unpick these concepts and present us with the Set as you see him?
Yeah, well, Set is an ancient Egyptian deity, a very, very important one. One of the oldest as well. Sometimes in books called the indigenous god, I kind of been there so long, so much part of the Egyptian landscape. His origins are kind of very, very obscure. Set is, I don't know about the Saturn thing. People, whether he's Saturnine, there is a kind of theory that he's connected with a kind of death. Really, he obviously his most famous defining characteristic is the fact that he's the actual god that kills Osiris. Which in itself is a remarkable moment in thought, in religious thought, spiritual thought. The idea that you have a god that gets killed in some ways in this cycle, and on the face of it, you think, well, all right, he's the god. So you've got this quite elaborate piece of mythology, and then which is complex in Egypt and is contradictory. The god that being killed, to make a joke of it, being killed in Egypt is not always such a bad thing. The process of death is necessary, you know, as part of the transformation to another state. And in a sense, the god Osiris wouldn't exist as a god if he didn't go through this process of death and rebirth. And that applies to people as well. So the god that it applies to people because people have to go through this kind of underworld initiation, if you like. So the god that does the deed, which is a very, very taboo thing, is this god Set. So in a sense, he's sometimes called a demonic initiator. He's someone who initiates primarily Osiris, but all people really into this altered state or into this transcendental state through quite a kind of traumatic ordeal, or in a sense through death and rebirth. And this process is incredibly, this is the secret, this is the ultimate, from a certain point of view, this is the ultimate secret and the ultimate thing that a lot of magic is all about, is this resurrection chamber, or this mysterious thing that happens in this sealed space in which someone is dead and revived. So you kind of think about alchemy as well. You have this idea that you're taken apart, you're completely taken apart, and you're put back together again. So Set is the deity from ancient Egypt who actually does this to you. He's the one who does that. He's the operator. So he's the initiator. He's the demonic initiator. So that's why you might think of that the Saturn thing, or as I say, somebody's called a demonic initiator in the sense he initiates through this incredible ordeal of death and rebirth and the underworld. So that's one of his primary functions. He's also got this Gnostic function of the Egyptians had this idea that there'd been this kind of battle. There's a constant battle for creation to exist. It has to go through this process of renewal, of destruction and renewal, which, you know, in terms of magical philosophy, we kind of understand that more than we ever used to. And there's another entity, the personification of evil, if you like, so, which may be Set, or it may be given another name called Apep, who's this extremely ancient psychological supernatural force from the beginning of time, who, whenever people try to organize themselves, this chaotic force will kind of create, but it'll also try and knock it all down. And the Egyptians kind of thought that the conflict with something was was good for you in a way. It's creative. It's creative chaos. But the thing about a Pep is he has this incredible magical power. He's the source of magic really in the world. And there's only one entity or supernatural entity who can kind of look into the chaos, into the kind of chaos at the center of everything, and that is Set. So that's his other thing. He's got this incredible magical power that he can't. Whereas most people, most of us, we can be completely hypnotized by images and by the world in which we live in. We live in a kind of a world of an illusion. Set has this ability to look chaos in the face, to see through the illusion, to see things as they are and not be destroyed or by it. So that Set is an incredibly important god from that point of view. It's a remarkable creation that the Egyptians came up with this idea so long ago, and it's kind of an imperative. It's an imperative. It gives magic its heart in some ways. The fact that it's concerned with the problem of evil, the problem of creation, how things get going, and the place of destruction and creation in revival, really, in transcendence. So that there's a lot more to it. Sometimes Set is he's very thought to be very violent and passionate entity. So very confusing. He's sometimes called the Lord of Confusion. Whereas again, which are quite unusual ideas, really, that confusion is a necessary part of being human or being divine as well. To be completely lose it, that you have to be able to lose it and be confused and be ambiguous, not to fit within one thing or another. These are incredibly creative concepts within the Egyptian way of looking at the world, and Set is responsible for all of that. So yeah, you can see once you know that about him, you see why people think that they really have to.
No, I'm getting some links
in their life.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, Mogg. I'm getting some links flashing up here because I know you equate Set with Mercury, and Mercury is, as we named Wednesday after Woden. There's seems to be a link there with the idea when you say demonic initiator. Now, Odin, they talk about the path of Woden and all this, like the shortest path. This is hanging yourself from the tree, etc. There seems to be a testing and a kind of destruction going on. So there, I can see, even if it's very tenuous, my mind is trying to construct a link.
The ideas are connected completely.
Yeah.
Most people, obviously, from earlier writing, people kind of thought he sounds very saturnine, but really, whether this is relevant, but the Egyptians, in terms of their actual astrology and astronomy, they said he was connected with the planet Mercury. And when you think of the qualities of the planet Mercury in terms of, the way it is, and its connection with alchemy and transformation and with knowledge and with magic and with having lots of different attributes, slightly tricky. Mercury is a very tricky thing, isn't it? It teaches you and it initiates you, but in a kind of weird way. It's not straight and narrow type thing, and so it does fit really the mercurial. When you talk about someone being mercurial, having the quality of the planet Mercury, then Set is definitely mercurial as well, and ambiguous as well, male and female, being kind of ambiguous in terms of ideas. All of these things are kind of attributes of the god Set. Incredibly interesting. Not the, an important deity within the
Yeah. Obviously, Mercury and Saturn and I don't know what I see Set as. I see Set as being coloured red. Is that just my imagination that I'm equating Set with the devil, or is Set actually red? Is that just
Well,
me?
it's got something to do with the devil as well, with certainly the way that people always with Shaitan and the devil. These concepts, how they developed historically, are probably informed a little bit by the idea of the trickster or the tempter, the person who tests you out. Uh, there seems to be something there, really. But it's
Uh,
not completely, uh, one for one link. But certainly, I would thought this idea of personification of evil, or the problem of evil, that sets territory, and I suppose that's what, when people are talking about the devil and Satan and everything, and Lucifer, that's kind of what they're talking about as well. Really, they're trying to
yeah,
discuss these issues of why certain negative things have to exist in our world.
definitely. As you speak there,
Things of
everything's flashing
progress.
up.
Yeah, we definitely
Satan,
have that.
the tempter, the deceiver, Odin, suffering, the magical path being something that is a
Mm.
journey that will.
Odin on the tree is kind of like Osiris, really, as well. Definitely.
Yeah, and I mean, I think many of us can relate to the idea of being almost entirely destroyed by these practices. Sorry to introduce my own experience, but like until I was found by someone with more experience, I would say that I was walking on the edge a lot. So I can definitely relate to the idea of this, this mercurial testing and abrasive experience. Yeah, absolutely. This brings us on really neatly to the next question, and I'm really fascinated to hear what you'll say to this one. And that is number 8. What animal do you think Set represents, donkey or aardvark? And what about that forked tail?
Well, people often because it's such a strange entity set that it's developed this whole puzzle about, because he's got various animal avatars, and one in particular called the Set animal. It causes people a lot of problems trying to explain what it is, because it doesn't seem to be a kind of any uh, clearly any animal. So it looks a little bit like a dog, and it's a little bit like a donkey, and it's got this very distinctive ears. And so there are many, many theories about uh, what that might entail.
Confusion.
Talking about the tail as well, he's got this very strange tail. It's a very symbolic animal. The tail of Osiris is a kind of sometimes it's represented as an arrow. So it's like someone has kind of stabbed him in the back, really, with a knife or an arrow. But then when you look at the arrow, attached to the end of the arrow is this strange little kind of flint knife. And napping a flint is this incredibly ancient technique. And you can look into what it, so it's an animal with a knife strapped to its tail, so it's obviously symbolic. It can't be a natural thing. But the knife itself is a special tool that was very, very prized by the Egyptians, that was used to sever the umbilical cord at the moment of birth. And you could see how that's quite an important transitional point. So Set is associated with these kind of climactic moments, really, the moment of birth and death. And
So
that's
are we
represented
talking
in these
that?
tales.
Yeah, are we talking that
But I
that
think the animal
shape,
is a
like a nut?
psychological construction. The Egyptians like this sort of thing. They like to say it's not a natural thing. They're pretty good at depicting natural creatures when they want to be. They want you to think about it in a different way. That this is something special. This is a monster in a way. In the strict sense of being a monster is a kind of combination of lots of different things that shouldn't normally be together. That's what makes for a good monster. You know, it's got a wrong head on the wrong body or wherever it might be. So Set's form is sort of monstrous, and monstrous things are important. You know, you take it for granted. Why do people have always constructed these monsters? Maybe they really exist, or maybe they kind of want you to think they do. That because the monstrous stops you thinking in a natural way, and it forces you to go a bit deeper and think, well, what is the real meaning of this? That's what a monster does. It's so inappropriate, the symbolism, that it forces you inside. What is that? Obviously, you know, this is what a demon does as well, I guess. It's another kind of form of monster. So yeah, my answer is I don't completely go with that it's any sort of natural animal. I think whatever way you look at it, there's so many of its attributes are artificial. You know, its head could be part of a plow, and its ears could be chopped off as some sort of punishment, and it's got a kind of knife attached to the tail secretly. So it's got Set has got natural forms as well, like the hippopotamus and the donkey. But I think that the Set animal, that's what it is, really. It's a monster in the best agnostic sense of what a monster is.
And it is truly fascinating. I mean, I remember I did go to Egypt in the year 2000. I really hope that I'll be able to return one day, but I come face to face. I'm going to ask you, if we get to this question this time, I was going to ask you about this. Oh, actually, no, we should get to it. It's the next question, actually. Yeah, the ears sort of squared off, and the face like it. I mean, it reminded me of that cartoon Aardvarks I used to watch when I was a kid. So that's why I thought it was an aardvark to begin with. And then it's like, well, it does look like an Egyptian donkey, and like you say, the forked. That's news to me. A knife-ended tail, which is a little bit like conjures up Satan again, and this god of confusion.
Yeah, well,
you
so
can't
there's a
pin
new
it.
book
Really
out that has quite an
being.
interesting theory about that, about the ears and the nose, which is because it does. I don't know what I think about this, but it is interesting. It does resemble the image of the plough, i.e., literally the plough, the thing that you use for ploughing the fields to plant seeds, but turned upside down. If you look at the images of the Egyptian plough, it's got a, you know, you've got, so the ears would be the bits you hold onto, and there's this weird piece of mythology where Set is used, his nose is rubbed into the soil, and the blood goes into the crops as a way of kind of fertilizing them in a way. So it's
Osiris, the
a
seeds.
possibility, I think. But that would still emphasize the idea that you're talking about a symbolic construction there, a magical construction. It's a piece of magic.
Yeah, when you said the plough, it's like the blood to the seeds. Osiris.
Yeah, I think there's a reference to that book, which is, you know,
amazing. Yeah. Really, really fascinating, and it's good. I'm learning new things here as well, which is really, 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 stimulating. And yeah, the next question actually is: there is a beautiful statue presented as Ramses III with the pharaoh standing between Horus and Set in the Egyptian Museum. How would you interpret this statue?
Well, I mean, this is the other thing. We've talked quite a lot about this Gnostic, or possibly negative aspect of the god Set, right? The malign aspect of Set, the demonic initiator. But there's this other. What's awkward about that thesis is that there's this whole stream of thought in which Set has this very positive function as the protector of the sun god, for instance. He protects the sun god without the existence of Set, the sun god, according to Egyptian mythology, would be in a lot of trouble. It would be destroyed. And he repeats that process. And you could say, like, when you go to sleep at night as well, the reason you wake up in the morning is partly because psychologically Set has fought this battle for you, which would have been the way the Egyptians looked at it. And so he protects the sun god, and by extension, he protects kingship. He protects the pharaoh in Egyptian culture, who is a kind of vicarious figure for all of us as well. Wherever the pharaoh used to do as an elite, everybody has a go in the end at that. It becomes a more democratic thing. So in that statue that you're talking about, which is a wonderful work of art, still in the Cairo Museum, as far as I know, you've got the two forces, if you like, of Horus, the kind of entity, deity of kingship and orthodoxy in lots of ways. And you've got Set, this kind of more chaotic, violent side. So both sides of nature, this reconciliation of the two opposites, that's a very important Egyptian perspective, really, and that's completely represented in that statue. They didn't always believe that. The statue was made for Ramesses III, and that particular line of kings and queens were very, very into the god Set. But as well as all the other deities within the pantheon. So it's very noticeable that they made a lot of images, very positive images, Set within there. So it's obviously important to them. They acknowledge, they have quite a mature attitude, really, that you have to have the positive and the negative, the light and the shadow. It's always there, whether you want it to be there. You may as well acknowledge it and work with it. And I think that's what that statue is all.
Absolutely, yeah. It's almost too simple in a way, isn't it? You look at it, you kind of get it. Like, this is balance, light and darkness. You can't go one way or the other. You have to stand in the middle. It's going to keep going on. You're going to keep having to balance. And I mean, with meditation as well and Hermeticism, there's a strong emphasis on, well, I guess the lineage that I'm, within, there's a strong emphasis on balancing and the balancing process of the breath within meditation work. So yeah, definitely see so much in that statue. Okay, question 10. Forgive the use of the word religion, as it doesn't really apply with paganism as such, but what do we know about ancient Egyptian religion, and how does one go about reconstructing it?
Well, as you say, the Egyptians, in most of the they didn't really have a word like religion. They didn't use the term religion. I suppose it's an assumption that you need it. I mean, it's very, very useful. Obviously, we want to talk about these things. I think that's how the word religion came about, really, is that people needed certain concepts in order to kind of say, well, there's this thing that binds people together. We call it religion, if you like. I think it's the Romans who kind of come out. So they didn't, for the Egyptians, maybe they didn't really kind of think that they needed something like that. They didn't need to, it was just obvious and self-evident. What they did have was this idea of magic. Magic itself is, again, not one of their words. They have the word Hecka, but essentially it's usually translated as the word magic, which is quite, for them, was quite an elevated thing. So essentially that was their religion, if you like. So hence we use the term magical religion. That's like they're very, very different, the Egyptian culture, to other cultures around them, in the sense that they have all these kind of quite challenging concepts. So you talk about the Egyptian magical religion, even though, as I say, they could have done without the word religion. And it's a good idea to think, well, why do you even question it? Why do you even really need to think about those things? To reconstruct it, well, it turns out that probably we were already doing a lot of it. It's part of the magical tradition, but we just didn't know where these ideas came from. So to reconstruct it, someone has to go and read the text and work out how they're doing it. In the Hermetic text, they have a very, very important magical ritual, which is the creation of images, the creation of a statue, which of course is very, very taboo to other religions around them. But this is the quintessential piece of Egyptian magic, is bringing inanimate things to life. But to study it, it's quite complicated. Obviously, you would expect that some of the things that are there are not going to be relevant. When you enter into it, you don't know whether it's going to be just kind of interesting, but there's no way you can do that anymore, or whether it's going to be relevant to you. And I think it's turned out that quite a lot of what they do is relevant. But to reconstruct it, you just become a pagan or study magic, because almost everything now has been acknowledged is coming from that tradition. But we've got a whole lot of text. They wrote a lot of text when the Egyptians knew that their culture was about to be cancelled. They kind of buried quite a lot of material on the premise that they knew that sooner or later people are going to want to know all this stuff. They're going to dig it up. They kind of prophesied it, really, that they're going to come back and people are going to read their stuff again, even though they've forgotten it. It took a long time, and it came back. So the material is there. Things like the Corpus Hermetica or the magical papyri. There's loads there to just go and do it, really. And that's the reconstruction, and do some reading. Read the primary text of Egyptian religion to reconstruct is a text called the Amduat. So they write these quite long Gnostic books, really, the Egyptians, and they kind of carve them on the walls of their tombs, which in a way kind of distracted people from what they were. People think, oh, they're pretty pictures and everything, but actually they're books of knowledge. And the Amduat is a kind of long book of knowledge, of knowing of the self. That's probably what is in the underworld, in the sense of what is in the unconscious of a human being. And it's quite a huge text. And that book has, again, a secret history within the West. The weird thing about it is that the knowledge of this text called the Amduat, and a particular place in Egypt, in Abydos, the Osirion or resurrection chamber, those two things, this book and this place, you take those two together and you can more or less tell the entire history of Western magic and Western alchemy. It's all in that. And complicated by the fact that it's quite a sexy culture, really, quite prepared with what came afterwards. So it has to be disguised. So they said about disguising it so that people wouldn't disparage it. So you can still see the threads of it in the Western tradition, really. But you can go back. I'd say go back to the original now. Excuse me. So that's what you do. Read the Amduat and read the PGM, maybe, or follow the ritual cycle. That's the other thing I've kind of been saying Egyptians had this ritual cycle of their gods. They didn't just all exist at once. And if you follow the cycle and you use the lunar calendar as they did, the cycle of the seasons, nature itself will teach you the religion. That's how the religion is really taught. It's through nature. It's a very natural religion, which is paganism. That's what paganism is about. It's about returning to the source, returning to nature. But so much of our later development has kind of divorced us from all of those natural cycles. I know you're living out in nature a lot more than most of us do. You probably see more of us. Most of us are quite insulated from that. And in terms of their calendar and everything, we've over thousands of years, we gradually developed a system that tore us away and divorced us from nature. So one of the ways you can reconstruct is to try and return to the natural lunar cycle. So people often say to me, well, how do you worship this god or that god? But for the Egyptians, the primary way to do that would be to worship your god, or to think about your god on the full moon. So many of those festivals were full moon festivals or new moon festivals, which were completely forgotten and transposed to a completely new calendar, and thereby ripped away from nature. So you have to go back to the lunar cycle, and then you're going back a long way in time psychologically. And if you do that, you will actually end up reconstructing the Egyptian religion as it was, or you'll get a kind of sense of it. And the cycle of the stars and the cycle of the seasons will actually teach you the religion. So that's it in a nutshell. Just get out there and look at the moon.
Yeah, and obviously the Nile is it's just a key feature, isn't it? You know, the kind of, I guess it's a unique situation on the planet, is it? The Nile, there's nothing quite like the Nile anywhere else.
Well, there's this unique thing about the Nile that when we practice magic, because there's this natural element of orientation, of being what they call cardinality, having a sense of where you are physically, not in a simple sense of north, south, east, and west, above, below, and center. Well, that sounds kind of ludicrously simple, but it's actually based, as you're hinting, on the physical setup of Egypt itself, where the River Nile, by some accident of geography, runs from the south to the north, as does the Milky Way, which is the celestial version of the River Nile. And then you've got the passage of the sun from east to west, gives you the other axis of the things. And so there's this orientation thing. That's why the ancient texts, they talk about Egypt as being the temple of the world. I think they mean in terms also that its physicality, the physicality of the Nile Valley itself, the way it orientates to the celestial realm and to the physical realm, probably is a little bit unique in the world. You know, there are other places that have these great river systems and whatever, but I don't think there's one that's quite as four square as that one. And this is psychologically an incredibly important moment.
Yeah, it's very striking, and I've noticed as well. I've never seen this written anywhere, but maybe you have. That the Nile is shaped like a lotus flower, isn't it?
Well, these are things that the Egyptians would definitely have been into. The Nile. But also you've got this structure from south to north, but you've got this kind of what would you call it? This hook shape in the middle of it. If you look at it on a map, it kind of flows, and then there's this huge, great bend.
It looks like a leaf, doesn't it?
Yeah, more or less around where Abydos is. There's this great big bend, and That is exactly the same shape as the tool used to open the mouth in the important opening of the mouth ceremony. And I know they couldn't have seen these things from above, but I think they might have realized that they often build this structure, this hook structure, into other buildings, into pathways, into the even in the pyramids. In fact, you've got these air shafts, but the air shafts don't go straight out. They kind of move for a little bit, and then they form this kind of little hook shape, and then they continue on their way. I don't think anything like that is accidental. I think that's, you know, that's completely deliberate. And that's paganism is like that. It has this physical gnosis, carnal knowledge, if you like, knowledge through physical orientation, which we've kind of lost track of a little bit in our modern alienated lifestyle, which we've been alienated, I know, for thousands of years, but
yeah,
even more so now. You know, like the passage of this, it's getting worse all the time, obviously, with the light pollution and all the rest. But we've been wrenched away from natural cycles for thousands of years. And part of the purpose of studying Egyptian magic is to try and say we need to go back a little bit. We need to remember.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And you know, sometimes I just look up the sky and I'm like, why can't I see the stars? This is actually ridiculous. Like, this is some kind of blindness. And this idea of as above, so below, how everything symbolically resonates, and you know, a tool that someone would use in a ritual is the same shape as a section of the river, and you might see that again in the stars, and it has this meaning, and how everything is so symbolically tied together that you can literally, like yourself, spend a lifetime trying to unpick these concepts. And it's quite lovely, actually. All these questions seem to sort of bleed into the next one quite well. So number 11 is the ancient Egyptians, saying that a lot today, the ancient Egyptians were said to possess 9/10 of all the magic upon the earth. In your opinion, what caused them to be so highly regarded as magicians?
Well, as I say, I think it relates to what I say. I often wonder what that phrase, which actually comes from a Jewish source. I think it comes from the Talmud, and I suppose they'd say the other 1/10 probably is in Judaism as well. But then they trace their origins to the Egyptian culture, their own foundation myth. I think it is partly to do with the geography of the place and its history that gives them so much power. But partly well, we could just say that it must be the geography and the River Nile and the particular look of the constellations. I often wondered though if other cultures such as the Babylonian or they're going to argue with this. They're going to say, well, we don't completely agree with that. But it is interesting that in the Judaic tradition, which has this also incredibly important and powerful magical system, that it's them that come up with that idea really. And in fact, in some of the spells, some of the ones I've given in the book, you know, they'll say, "Oh, well, may this be so according to the magic of the Hindus, according to the magic of the Greeks," and then they'll say, "According to the Egyptians and according to the high priests of Egypt." So they get kind of two goes really. You know, you get the blessing from all these other cultures, but they're according to the Jews, as I say, according to the Hindus, according to the Greeks, according to the Babylonians, but Egypt will always have two goes, right? So it's kind of a knowledge, really. There must be something special about their origins, I guess. that does that. Was again, they do have this origin story, the Egyptians themselves, about this strange battle at the beginning of time. Whether that's a psychological thing or a real thing, this battle between sort of chaos and order, and the idea that there was a previous culture, advanced culture, that was destroyed in this battle. Now that's kind of a myth. It's certainly in the view of the Egyptians. It's what they thought, that there'd been this previous creation, and that the only way that they could stop it being destroyed again was by the development of magic. It's the magical power, the creation of images, which they're so famous for. You can't think of a more visual culture than the Egyptians. It's all about images and stuff. That's what they're famous for. Without magic, the Egyptian culture, or the world culture, the world itself, wouldn't have come into existence. It is the creative force. There's another element to that as well, that when things were going, well, there's the battle at the beginning of time, but obviously there's a moment when Egyptian culture goes through these very destructive, when it falls apart. When the Egyptian culture falls apart in the what they call the first intermediate period, and they built the pyramids and this wonderful art and this culture and everything, but it kind of falls apart. People don't want it. Something happens. And things get really, really bad in terms of famine and disease and society. Everybody hates each other. But some people say that's another moment in which magic, it comes to the rescue. That's the point in which magic is recreated or created, either created for the first time or recreated, reclaimed from what is already an old past. And that's the thing that puts the Egyptian culture back together. So I think that's why it has this strange history, really, these events that have happened, where in the end it's the magic that brought it, that enabled them to survive. It's the thing that enables them to survive until the end, and then in the end, it's when the magic fails in the time of Nectanebo II, that's when the Egyptian culture disappears. The magic had been working, but suddenly, like with anything, say when you're a magician, not all magic isn't infallible, but there comes a point where the magic fails, or the magic of the other culture is more powerful.
Yeah.
Or just so powerful for other reasons. So that's why it's such an important thing. It's the thing that helps them to survive. And without it, it's the thing that leads to the end of their culture. And it's the reason why they were cancelled as well. It's a strange irony.
It's funny. That's a new way, a new description I've heard. This idea of Egypt, ancient Egypt, being cancelled. I take it you mean cancelled by the church. In terms of the magical practice. Yeah. You just started to hint at the next question, actually, which was, what is Hecka?
What is Hecka? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Hecka is instead of, they didn't use the term magic. Magic is a later Latin term, but their term for this power that they discovered and that rescues them is Hecka. And literally Hecka, car, which you may know the term car is kind of everybody has a car, a double. So Hecka means the creation of images. So literally they're saying magic, what we call magic for the Egyptians, is the creation of images. But by the creation of images, which includes things like language and writing and scripts and words, these are all images, really. but also pictures and colors and all the different things that they're very famous for. This is this thing that later times people call magic, and it's the creative force that exists within the world, that makes the world live according to the Egyptian point of view. Is this duplication of images?
Yeah.
You know, even reproduction in a way is like the creation of a double of another image of yourself. I think that's the way the Egyptians would have looked at all of this stuff, and they called it Hecka. Hecka is not just a kind of abstract force; it's also a divinity as well. It's a complex word. It's there's the first exponent, the first magician that's created in order to kind of deal with this crisis. It's also the entity Hecka.
Yeah, a lovely word as well. It rolls off the palate nicely. I think if anyone's starting a heavy metal band out there, call it Hecka.
Yeah.
Yeah. And right, so the next question, moving on. Obviously, mummification is just something we associate with Egypt. So what is mummification all about on a level above what we learned in school? Why preserve bodies?
Did you really learn about that in school?
Yeah, a little bit, yeah. I remember we were taught that the pyramids had all secret traps in them and people would get, you know, like Indiana Jones, and something about mummification. That's all I can remember from school here.
Well, mummification is, well, apparently there's an extension of this now that they say it's not necessarily about preserving a body, it's about it's about creation of an image. It's the turning of the body into a statue in a way, or into an image, into a divine image. So the idea is if you can turn the body into an image, into divine image, then the other supernatural entities, the gods, will find it more acceptable. And as your ultimate fate is to go and become part of the divine firmament of stars, you have to be prepared for that process by mummification. So it is a philosophical thing. It is an important model in a lot of other areas. It's the removal of the bad bits in the body, really, and the perfection of the good bits. And that led to the medical system of Egypt, the first medical system in history. Was modeled on the idea, because in mummification, obviously, you're trying to get rid of all the necrotic things, the things that might bring it down. And you can do that to the living as well. Almost everything that you read about in Egypt is done for the benefit of the living, really, as well. So the processes that take place in mummification, the eradication of rotten substance, is applied to living people in terms of the application of medicine. That's the origin of medicine in Egypt. So it's a kind of and if you kind of think about the history of medicine anyway, which is very much tied up with spirituality and magic, you know, you're overcoming certain elements of the world in order to let people live long enough to achieve certain spiritual and physical goals. And mummification is a sort of medicine practiced on the dead body in order to turn it into an image of a divine entity, so that they can then go on. So it's not. I don't think it's really intended that you come back. They never did anyway. I don't think anybody ever did, apparently.
I've always thought that was strange.
It's this thing of the creation of an image again. The creation of a divine image.
Why would you want to come back? I mean, I've always thought that was strange. Like, surely you're creating. I mean, you know, this is just a theory, but surely you're creating, like you say, an image within the astral where this mummification is creating a kind of resonance and preserving your perhaps personality in order that you can be conscious upon death and undergo the trials lucidly, remember the spells. Just an idea. But yeah, just there's just something. Yeah, there's just something. It's almost disturbing, but also beautiful about you know, seeing, you know, the mummies and all that, and pondering why. Right. Question 14. Are there any clear instructions in statue animation remaining within the ancient Egyptian texts in stone or papyrus?
Say that again. Are there all right? Clear instructions. Oh yeah, well of course. Of animation. Yeah, there are plenty of all the way through. It's probably one of the most important magical rituals the Egyptians did. And it's described in the pyramid text, which is pretty much the first text that we come across. Although it doesn't really give you too much information about how you do it. You have to wait a little bit longer before they create this quite complicated ritual for reanimating the statue. Part of the reanimation process is, as well as the construction of this object, this ritual object, there's a process of dream incubation. There has to be the priest, in order to know it's successful, the rich people, somebody has to kind of do it in parallel with the dead person. They go into a trance. They're bound up like a mummy, and they go into a sort of trance-like sleep, and they can tell you how the thing is progressing on a spiritual level. So there's a long description of that, and then as you get near to the end of Egyptian culture, as is often the case, the rituals become slightly shorter and more sensible in a way, or because it's too difficult to do these enormous long rituals. So you work out which of the bits are the most important. And there's a ritual for animating statues or any magical object, of blessing a magical object, including something like a magical ring or a picture or whatever. In this collection of texts called the Magical Papyri, that you can get various versions of. It's quite complicated, but in my book on Egyptian magic, I've got a kind of version of this spell, which is the late version of this ritual that started life in the pyramid text and probably before that, for reanimating objects. And the thing that you have to do from a Gnostic point of view to kind of connect with them again, to bring things to life. This is the quintessential Egyptian ritual, really. You find it mentioned in the Corpus Hermetica, and of course you find it banned all over the place as well in other religions. It really freaks people out, I think.
Yeah.
In early Christianity and all the rest of it, this is the thing that they found almost the most offensive part of the Egyptian culture, was their ability to bring inanimate objects or dead objects back to life in some way.
Yeah.
It's sufficiently spooky that they kind of banned it.
Yeah.
And took it out of the literature, really. But yeah, there's in the book of Egyptian Magic and in the PGM itself, there's a kind of more manageable version of this spell. It takes about a month, I think, to do one version of it, with a little bit being done every day.
Yeah. Don't tempt me. That sounds like just really, really interesting. And well, obviously we've seen all of the noses smashed off of the Egyptian statues, which theoretically is to prevent the statue from breathing.
Yeah, there you go. There's a good idea.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about that. See, that's the value of the dialectic. That's probably why they've smashed the nose, of course, to stop it coming to life.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, why else? Right? And so
Yeah,
consistently.
absolutely.
Yeah, it's obviously the reason why it was done. And I'll tell you, I'll ask you one more question, then we'll turn the camera off and assess your energy levels. You tell me what you want to do. We'll
All right.
just get more in before we break for a moment. But this is one I'm really, really keen to see what you think. Well, like all of them, like a kid in a candy shop. Where is the ancient Egyptian afterlife? Is this the same thing as the duat? And this is the key thing. Is the underworld actually located in the sky?
These questions, you like to ask these complicated questions.
Yeah. Come on,
I
is there any other way?
have to point out there isn't one unified view from the Egyptians.
Do you know what? That is actually,
Egyptians, every
that's
Egyptian
my
believes
next
different
question.
things.
Yeah, my next question says over 3,000 years, it keeps changing. But we'll
It
get
keeps
anyway.
changing, but I think as well they kind of each Egyptian makes up their own mind about this. Judging by the coffin text, where everybody kind of writes their own version of what they think the truth is. So, and even in terms of the afterlife, the ideas are a little bit contradictory. There's this idea that you go and become every man and every woman is a star. In a sense, you return to the stellar realm in some spiritual sense, where you. But then also from there, there's the idea that you might be reborn and become another human being. You re-enter the biosphere. Both of these ideas seem to coexist. The the duat, or the is the underworld. Well, they certainly write about when this came into existence. It's a kind of ghostly realm, really, in the very, very early text. In this battle that we mentioned earlier, at the beginning of time, one of the things is that the creation of this other dimension, which you might think of as the duat. I think that's probably how they looked at it, as another place. And it's also because the metaphor of the duat is also linked with the desert itself, the wilderness. So you have the kind of human place of living along the banks of the Nile, in where the agriculture is in the cities. And then you have this other space where nothing much can live out there, thousands of miles of it, in the desert, which is also that has this sort of life, and it's kind of thought of as the kind of unconscious realm, the realm beyond the horizon in the desert. I think that one of the parallel, you can't avoid the sort of parallel, the insight that we have from the modern world, that it is like the unconscious as well. And each one of us has a little bit of this other realm inside of our heads, which we call our unconscious. In some ways, it seems to connect with this greater consciousness as well. Yep. So I think all those different things are possible. It is kind of located in the sky. There's some connection there, and the sky has a sort of. It's almost like the sky is talking to us. That's why they would say that as well. The sky has these stories that it tells us all the time, and some people think even the hieroglyphic script is based on the constellations and seeing all these shapes in the sky. So it's in the sky. But it's also another dimension in some sense, and part of that dimension that sits within each individual as their unconscious self, and all these things connect with each other. That's the nearest. That would be a view, but I'm sure you'd find examples in the Egyptian texts themselves where they have a completely different view of what that is. They struggled to. This is the mystery of life in a way that all Egyptians wanted to have their own answer to.
Yeah, it's really cool. Like, there's just this multi-symbolic way of looking at the world, life, death. It doesn't have to be one thing. It's like they're working it out artistically, they're on the journey of living this within their art, culture, civilization, and you can't perhaps arrive at a solid, well, this is where, like, hell, heaven, underworld, whatever, just these places. It's multi-dimensional, not only within within the mind, but also within the the higher planes, or perhaps even lower planes. Yeah, really. Just as a
Well,
side note,
their legacy to the world, really, they created all of those concepts. They created, as Budge said in his book, heaven and hell is a kind of Egyptian creation, this other world.
yeah,
And
definitely.
they thought that this is obviously this is what they think had happened at the beginning of time, the creation. Maybe it was something that happened to human beings at some point when they woke up, the creation of this other realm. But it's definitely the Egyptian legacy to humanity.
Absolutely. And when you think about it, if you're mystically examining other realms, you're going to need a way of communicating that on multiple levels anyway, aren't you? Because the priesthood are going to have it's a bit like, I don't know. And when you talked about images earlier, I thought, I listened to a Buddhist guy the other day saying that he didn't sort of, have much respect, or didn't think it was worthwhile spending too much time with images. You want to move past images and past the senses. So as you was talking about images, I thought, I'm sure the ancient Egyptians realized that they also had to move past images as well. I'm sure within the priesthood there would have been this idea of, the divine ecstasy of Amun or something,
A debate between a Buddhist and an Egyptian philosopher. That would be kind of interesting, I think.
Yeah.
See what they made of that.
Yeah, just get the Buddha and the guy who designed the Great Pyramid, get them have a conversation, and that would be, that would be really cool. I wanted to ask you, actually, just before we turn the camera off for a second, did you ever catch that article? It was just like a newspaper thing where scientists said that scarab beetles orient themselves to the Milky Way.
No, I didn't. I've forgotten that one, but it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, I just, wow, amazing, this
All
creature
sorts
that
of strange mystery. Any animal, right, that's in their system will always have something odd about it. Not odd, but there'd be a deeper mystery in its natural history.
yeah,
All those animals that crop up in Egyptian images and mythology, they all have something unique about them. Some hidden power that they'd obviously observed, and we kind of come along and we say, oh yeah, well they did. Like Set, his fish avatar is not just any fish; it's a catfish. It's an electric fish. It's a very special one.
oh, okay.
So it's definitely worth exploring that. Yeah, that's a very
Yeah.
interesting.
The idea of the catfish automatically sums up notions of prana to me. That's really, yeah, really. But who knows? I mean, that's the trouble with interpretation. Okay, we'll turn the camera off and we'll talk about what we're going
Okay,
to
well,
do.
look, just in case we don't come back, let me say Senate T, and
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I'll tell you what. We'll just turn the camera off and then we'll hit record again, and we'll get you to tell everyone, where to buy your books and your website and all that stuff.
very kind of.
Okay, right.
And you've got about 30 questions.
Yeah, so, it's recording again now. Yeah, and we
I
are.
think we covered quite a lot of ground.
We just covered question 15, and it goes up to
Right.
32. So we're pretty much halfway through. And just for the viewer, Mogg has just said he would kindly come back and finish off the other questions. So if you want to see that happen, just hassle him. Whatever it takes. Bombard his email box. But no, don't do that. Anyway. So now, if we just allow Mogg, do you have any books that you would like to highlight, or a website, anything like this?
Yeah, well, there are quite a lot of books. Probably the most recent is the Egyptian Magic book, which is a kind of compilation as well as lots of the other ones. It's sort of cuts to the chase, but it's the one I find the most useful. You know, this is my kind of working magical book, really. So it changes, and I work through this system, and we work through it. My partner and other people. So this is probably the central one, but there are other ones as well. But to kind of make sense, I've also started doing this. I'm just that, but I've kind of pulled together this podcast on YouTube and Spotify, which kind of goes through the topics and tries to explain a little bit more because this material is quite difficult to I find anyway, quite difficult to package it and explain it to people. It takes quite a lot of time and stuff. So the Ancient Egyptian Magic podcast on YouTube, or also on Spotify or Anchor, whatever it is, you can find me there, and via that you can link to the other kind of social media things that I do on Twitter or
absolutely.
That's the main thing I'm working on. Why I like that is that because I've collected a lot of research and images and material, and if I do the YouTube thing, you can just listen to it and it should make sense. But if you're able to look at the video aspect to it as well, you'll see quite a lot of pictures of unusual things and kind of explain them. So yeah, join me on the Ancient Egyptian Magic podcast, and we can take it from there.
Oh, definitely, yeah. And I will say, I actually watched every single video on that channel to prepare for this
You're
podcast.
a hero.
And I didn't get bored. It was, I enjoyed the whole, so check out that channel. Obviously, send me any links, any rare, obscure ones I might not be aware with, Mogg, and I'll
check that out. And subscribe if you could. If I get to 1,000 subscribers,
subscribe to his channel. Subscribe to my channel as well if you haven't already. And okay, so yeah, we'll pick this up another time. And what was it? Did you say Senebti?
Senebti, yes, which means kind of blessings from the Egyptian point of view.
Oh, wonderful. Okay then, Mogg, thank you so much for your time. This has been absolutely fascinating, and Senebti. Oh, that's not it. Oh, that's the one. That was exhausting in all the right ways. Please consider supporting the channel. Obviously, this takes time and effort, and it's all free. You'll find links below for that. And any donations you do make will also help fund Seshen Circle Blue Bell Hill. So I will be really, really grateful. And yeah, that is everything. Take care. For those interested in beginning or perhaps refreshing Hermetic practice, please see the link below for Seshen Circle Blue Bell Hill, an online group in said Hermetic development. Thank you so much. Yeah, I have this new saying. No one gives a damn about your philosophy until you offer a product or a service. Yeah, 3 years in the dark.